I unexpectedly came home early from walking my dog. Through the slightly open door, I saw my husband putting sleeping pills into my teacup. That night, I poured it out when he wasn't looking. He quickly left when he saw I was sound asleep. I was deeply shocked when I secretly drove after him and saw him being intimate with Jessica, my cousin, the one I had once cared for like a real sister. Before I reveal all the actions that made them tremble, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'll tell you everything right now. My name is Kimberly, 37 years old, currently the manager of Lux Gems, a high-end jewelry store in downtown Detroit, Michigan. And I began to sense that something was off with Walter, my husband, an insurance agent. One evening, while I was washing the dishes, I caught him softly laughing, his eyes glowing as he looked at his phone. That smile, the one that had made me fall in love with him at first sight, now felt distant and unfamiliar. I suggested we take a vacation in Hawaii, the place he had once promised to take me after our wedding. He replied dryly, "We can't afford that, honey." I said nothing. I knew our joint account still had over $27,000, and it was clear he wasn't short on money, only short on honesty. That night, he made me a cup of chamomile tea, saying it would help me sleep better after a long, tiring day. I thanked him, lifted the cup, and took a few sips. The tea tasted as gently sweet as always, but just minutes later, my heart started racing strangely. My eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted off without realizing when. The next morning, when I opened my eyes, my head was spinning. My body felt heavy and achy, like I had just come down with a mild flu. I tried to fight it with a strong coffee, but the fatigue clung to me like a shadow. At the office, while I was arranging the display case, a young employee joked, "Kimberly, you look exhausted. Rough night with the husband, huh?" She giggled, and I forced a faint smile, saying nothing. In my mind, there wasn't a hint of embarrassment. Only one question echoed. Why am I this tired? That evening, I took our dog Cooper out for our usual walk. It was a routine I'd kept for years. Every evening after dinner, I would walk Cooper down the street lined with red maple trees, listening to music as we strolled. But tonight, just 3 houses down, I realized I had forgotten my headphones, the ones I always used for listening to YouTube podcasts or soft music. I turned back to get them. As I stepped up to the kitchen door, I froze. Through the crack of the slightly ajar door, I saw Walter standing by the table, holding a small white pill, gently dropping it into my teacup. He stirred it carefully, glanced around the room, then sighed in relief, like completing a familiar routine. I stood behind the door, my hand clutching Cooper's leash so tightly my knuckles turned white. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't understand why he was doing it, or what he intended to do once I fell asleep. I took a step back, heart pounding, yet my mind was unusually clear. I knew I couldn't react now. I needed to know the truth. I had to let him believe I was still as naive as ever. I quietly turned away, held Cooper close, and walked outside again, pretending I was just continuing our evening stroll. I forced my breathing to steady, took a longer route around the neighborhood for another 15 minutes to calm myself. When I returned, I put away Cooper's leash, smiled softly, and hummed a few random lines like nothing had happened. Walter was sitting in the living room, looking calm. I walked over, picked up the tea he had prepared, raised it to my lips, and pretended to take a small sip. He looked at me and gave a gentle smile. "Drink it all. Chamomile helps you sleep better." I smiled back and gently said, "Thanks. I'll drink it all before bed." Then I carried the cup to the bedroom, quietly closing the door behind me. The yellow light cast shadows on the wall. I stood still for a few seconds, then opened the window and poured the entire cup of tea outside. The cool, damp air of Detroit's night rushed in, sharpening my senses like never before. I placed the empty cup on the table, turned off the light, lay down, and closed my eyes. Every breath, every heartbeat, a performance. In the darkness, I thought of only one thing. Tonight, I will learn the truth. I lay still on the bed, still in my thin pajamas, my eyes gently closed. The hallway light slipped through the crack of the door, casting a narrow streak of brightness across the floor. I could clearly hear Walter's footsteps pacing in the living room, the faint clink of a teacup against the table. Then silence. A few minutes later, the bedroom door creaked open. He called my name softly, his voice tender as always. "Kimberly, are you asleep?" I kept my breathing even suppressing a faint sigh so he would think I was deeply asleep. His footsteps approached, stopping beside the bed. I felt his breath on my forehead, that familiar woody cologne. A hand gently tugged the blanket up to my shoulders. He whispered, "Sleep well." I heard him step back, the rustle of his shirt, then the sound of a drawer sliding open. A series of small noises followed. He was probably changing his shirt. The door closed softly, and his footsteps faded away, followed by the quiet click of the front door opening. I waited 5 more minutes. In the darkness, my heart pounded so loudly I could hear every beat. My muscles tensed with anticipation. When I was certain he had gotten into his Toyota, I sat up, threw on a light jacket, grabbed the car keys from the desk drawer, and carefully descended the stairs. The house was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Cooper lifted his head, eyes wide, but I placed my hand on his head, silently signaling him to stay quiet. The Detroit air was cool, the wind brushing through the maple trees, making the leaves rustle softly. I opened the garage door just as Walter's car turned the corner and disappeared to the right, then got into my Lexus RX 350. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key. It took a few seconds before I could steady my breathing. I turned off the garage light, only switching on the headlights once I reached the end of the street. In the distance, I saw the red glow of Walter's taillights as his sedan turned right at the intersection. I kept a distance of about 200 feet, driving slowly, my eyes fixed on the faint pulse of red ahead. Hundreds of thoughts raced through my mind. Maybe he was just meeting a friend. Maybe I was overthinking. But then, the image of the white pill dissolving into my tea returned. Every trace of trust shattered. I gripped the steering wheel, bit my lip until I tasted blood. But I kept driving, following him. We passed through the downtown area, the shops already closed, the neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Finally, Walter turned into the Madison Lofts, and I knew exactly who lived there. Jessica, my cousin, the girl I had once cared for as if she were my own sister. I turned off my headlights, parked at a safe distance, my heartbeat loud in my chest. I watched him park, turn off his engine, and step out. The apartment on the 3rd floor lit up. Then its door opened. A woman stepped out to greet him, slender figure, brown hair glowing under the hallway light. Jessica. I didn't need to see her face to know. Every movement was unmistakably hers. They embraced naturally, effortlessly, as if this weren't a secret at all, but a routine. The door closed behind them, the apartment bathed in a soft golden light. I sat in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. There were no more excuses left to console myself with. The truth stood before me, cold and merciless, like the Detroit night enveloping me. From inside my car, through the faintly lit window of the 3rd floor apartment, I saw Walter and Jessica kissing passionately. They stood close by the window, laughing and whispering like lovers long accustomed to each other, not like two people hiding an affair. Walter bent down to kiss her shoulder, and Jessica tilted her head, smiling, her hand resting on his chest in a way that spoke of familiarity, of repetition. I sat frozen, my chest tightening, breath trapped inside me. My heart pounded, not out of fear, but from a humiliation so deep it numbed my body. Jessica, the girl I once called my sister. When her parents died in a car accident nearly 20 years ago, she was only 12. My parents took her in, and I treated her as family. I was in my final year of high school then, and I saw her as part of my world, my responsibility. I taught her to cook, to do her hair, drove her to school, even cut down my part-time hours at the grocery store so I could take her to her first modeling photo shoots. I thought caring for Jessica was how I kept a small remnant of warmth in our family because we had no one else left. I remember vividly the day she texted me, "Sis, I just got hired as a model for a local fashion brand. I'll make you proud," I cried out of happiness. I believed in her effort. I believed my love had meant something. But in recent years, Jessica changed. She built an online image, became a fashion influencer on Instagram, posting mirror selfies, luxury parties, beach trips with captions about freedom and hustle. I still followed her, still supported her, often the first to hit, like on her posts. This apartment, the one she's now sharing with my husband, I helped her get it. When she said she needed a professional space for her new brand deal, I didn't hesitate to lend her $35,000 for the deposit. She hugged me through tears, saying, "You're the only family I have left." That sentence now echoed in my mind, tasting like poison. The golden light from her apartment reflected off my windshield, illuminating my tear-streaked eyes. Walter stood behind her now, his arms wrapped around her waist, kissing her neck. They laughed, raised their wine glasses, and toasted. The image etched itself into me, like a blade carving deep into flesh. I saw myself, the woman who believed marriage was a safe harbor, being erased from the story of my own life, replaced by the very person I once saved. For a moment, I wanted to fling open the car door, storm upstairs, pound on that door, scream until the neighbors heard everything, but a frail thread of reason held me back. I knew if I did that, everything would explode into chaos. I needed proof. I needed the truth laid bare, undeniable. I picked up my phone, turned on the camera, zoomed in as far as it would go, and recorded every moment. The light from their apartment framed them perfectly, capturing everything I needed. That light, in the quiet Detroit night, exposed more than their betrayal. It exposed the ruins of everything I had ever believed in. Love, family, kindness, all trampled beneath their feet. I wasn't just betrayed as a wife. I was betrayed by the very person I had raised, loved, and called my sister. I held my phone tightly in my hand. Their movements, the embraces, the kisses, the looks, played out on the small screen like a film I never imagined I would have to watch. Then, suddenly, a hand reached out and drew the curtain shut. The recording ended. I sat in the car for several minutes, not crying, not screaming, but unable to stop my mind from spinning. I closed my eyes and imagined them, on that sofa I had gifted her, his hands unbuttoning her blouse one by one, until nothing was left but two filthy bodies colliding in the dark. When I opened my eyes, I felt hollow, as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. Outside, Detroit remained indifferent, slick asphalt gleaming under streetlights, a few taxis passing by, the distant blare of a horn melting into the wind. Everything looked cruelly ordinary. I started the car and turned around. On the way home, tears began to fall. Not in sobs, but quietly, like drizzle tracing down the windshield. I used to think that if my husband ever cheated, I'd lose control. I'd scream, smash things, unleash everything inside me. But no, when truth finally struck, I found a strange calm instead. The kind of calm that comes after you've been destroyed, when you know there's nothing left to lose. When I returned home, I turned off the living room lights, removed my jacket, and lay back down in bed, still in the same old pajamas, pretending to be asleep, pretending I had never left. I lay there, eyes closed, unable to truly sleep. The room was utterly silent, only the ticking clock breaking the stillness. Each tick felt like a blade scraping through my thoughts. I remembered our wedding day at St. Mary's Church. Me in a lace-white dress, my hands trembling around a bouquet of hydrangeas. Walter kneeling before me, his gaze warm, his voice solemn in the echoing chapel. "I promise to love you for life, to never betray you." I had believed him. I had believed him with everything I had. Now that vow replayed in my mind like a warped melody, so painful I could barely breathe. I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling in the dark, tears slipping down soundlessly. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the door open. Walter was back. The jingle of keys, the thud of his shoes. He hummed softly, took off his coat, and tiptoed into the bedroom. I held my breath, turned slightly to my side, eyes closed. The mattress dipped as he lay down beside me, and a faint, unfamiliar perfume clung to his shirt, a scent that wasn't mine. His breathing soon steadied, and within minutes he was asleep. I lay still, staring into the darkness, counting the beats of my own heart. I didn't cry. The pain had moved beyond tears. It was now a deep, throbbing wound pulsing inside my chest. When dawn broke and sunlight seeped through the curtains, I heard the shower running. Walter was up early, getting ready for work, as if nothing had happened. I quietly slipped out of bed, walked barefoot into the kitchen. His phone was there on the table, the screen lighting up briefly before going dark again. No new password. He still believed I'd never touch his things. I opened his messages and scrolled down. There it was, a thread between him and Jessica. I read each line, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Baby, she still suspects nothing. I gave her the pill. She'll be out in 10 minutes. My blood turned cold. They weren't just cheating, they were conspiring, calculating every dose, every moment to keep me unconscious so they could meet in secret. I scrolled further. Beneath those texts was something worse. A plan. Once you move here next year, I'll redo the house paperwork. Everything will be under our names. Remember to use that signature sample. You copy it perfectly. I stopped at that line, my vision blurring. They didn't just want my husband. They wanted everything. My house, my assets, my life. Revulsion surged through me. I took screenshots of everything, emailed them to myself, then carefully placed his phone back where it had been. When he stepped out, hair still damp, he smiled casually. "You're up early." I turned to him, replying softly, "Yeah, I was going to make some tea." He kissed my cheek lightly, as if the night before had been nothing but a dream. But inside me, that dream had died. From that moment on, I knew I was no longer a trusting wife. I had become a witness to my own marriage, and the first piece of evidence was already in my hands. That afternoon, after I returned from work, I sent Jessica a short message. "Are you free tonight? I'd love to have dinner with you. Heard you just signed a new ad deal. Congrats." A few minutes later, she replied, "Of course, I'll be right over." I looked at the phone screen, a faint curl at the corner of my mouth. Perhaps Jessica still thought of me as the naive older sister, easy to trust, always ready to forgive. I prepared the dinner table carefully, grilled steak, strawberry salad, the red wine she liked. The aroma filled the kitchen, stirring memories of when we used to cook together when she was young. But tonight, this meal wasn't for celebration. It was to mark the end. Jessica arrived promptly at 7, wearing a beige mini dress, strong perfume, her face immaculately made up. "You're always so thoughtful," she smiled, placing her handbag on the chair. Moments later, Walter stepped out from the study, feigning surprise. "Jessica?" "Wow, it's been a while." He played it well. If I hadn't seen the evidence, I might have believed him. We had dinner in stiff silence, the clink of cutlery dry and mechanical. Walter tried to make jokes about work. Jessica responded with hollow laughs. I sat still, listening to two traitors perform for each other, as if testing how much I knew. Midway through the meal, I set down my glass, took out my phone. Without a word, I played the video from the Madison lofts. The warm light, the glowing window, two silhouettes embracing, clear as day. The audio was soft, but enough to hear their laughter. The room froze. Jessica turned pale, bit her lip, hands trembling as her fork fell with a loud clang. Walter forced a nervous smile. "You misunderstood. It was just a drunk mistake. I just dropped something off." Jessica cut in, voice shaking. still trying to sound proud. You didn't have to go that far. Everyone makes mistakes. I know I messed up, but did you really have to record it? I looked at them, not with anger, but cold detachment. A mistake? I said quietly, my voice frighteningly steady. Mistakes don't last for months. And mistakes don't need sleeping pills to be hidden. Walter went silent. Jessica dropped her gaze. The room sank into dead silence, broken only by the ticking clock. I pulled a folded debt note from an envelope and laid it in front of Jessica. $35,000. When do you plan to pay it back? She glanced at it, then forced a smile. Just consider it a gift, sis. You're not short on money. And hey, if it weren't for me, who'd keep your husband company while you're working? I stared at her. You're clever, Jessica. But you forgot. Gifts require consent. Walter slammed his hand on the table, voice rising. Enough! What are you gonna do? Divorce me? I looked at him, my calm enough to make him recoil slightly. Not gonna, I said. I already am. The room fell silent again. Jessica looked around, attempting a smile, but it failed. Walter picked up his wine glass and smashed it onto the floor, red wine spreading like a thin trail of blood across the wood. I didn't flinch. Inside me, pain had transformed into something else. Cold, precise, irreversible. The room was so heavy it felt like the air could be sliced. I stood up slowly, without a word. Walter and Jessica were both silent. Just the golden light casting shadows over shattered glass and the spreading wine stain on the floor. Strangely, it made me feel like I could breathe again. Maybe because finally, the truth had surfaced. I didn't look at them again. I turned and walked up the stairs, step by step, my heels clicking in the stillness. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out my old suitcase. The items I once imagined would journey with me through this marriage now waited silently in drawers. The white wedding dress, photo albums, birthday cards. I opened a smaller drawer and took out the necklace my mother had given me, a silver chain with a heart pendant, the one item I'd always kept close as a symbol of the pure love I once believed in. I placed it in my coat pocket and began packing. Each item into the suitcase was a memory being sealed shut. The shirt from our first trip, the wedding frame from Lake Michigan, the 10th anniversary card that read, "Forever yours." I chuckled. Forever sounded like a cruel joke now. Behind me, footsteps. Walter stood at the door, his face red, voice rough with rage. You're really leaving? Over a misunderstanding? I didn't answer, just kept folding clothes. He grabbed my arm, trying to stop me. Kimberly, stop! You're ruining everything. I turned, looked him in the eye. No, Walter, you already did that. His grip loosened. He stood frozen, then turned away. At the stairway, Jessica still stood, clutching her purse, eyes downcast. She said nothing, perhaps searching for words she didn't dare speak. I looked at her one last time. Don't say anything, I said quietly. You two deserve each other. I rolled my suitcase down the stairs. The wheels thudded on the wooden floor like heartbeats turning to silence. At the door, I glanced back one last time. This house once filled with laughter, now held only emptiness. I didn't let them speak another word. The door clicked shut behind me, soft but final. The Detroit night wind swept through my hair, cold but fresh. I walked into the long streetlights glowing faintly on the thin snow, and thought, some departures don't need goodbyes, because silence sometimes is the clearest answer of all. I rolled my suitcase to the doorstep of Lily's apartment, my best friend from college. She was an art teacher at the local high school, the kind of woman who brought light with her wherever she went. When she saw me on her porch, eyes swollen, face pale, Lily didn't ask anything. She simply opened her arms and pulled me into a hug. Come in, she said softly but firmly. I already made ginger tea. We sat on our old sofa draped in a wool blanket. I told her everything, from the drugged tea, to the Madison lofts, to the confrontation at dinner. Lily didn't interrupt, only listened, her eyes darkening each time my voice shook. When I finished, silence settled between us. She placed her teacup on the table, looked at me directly. Kimberly, I know this hurts like hell, but listen to me. What you need now isn't tears. It's action. I looked up. Action? Yes. Action to reclaim what's yours. Don't let them define who you are. Her words, simple but powerful, sparked something inside me. I nodded, wiped my tears. All right. Tomorrow, I start the next morning. Light rain fell over Detroit. I wore a sweater, tied my hair back, and visited attorney Sarah Carter, a specialist in divorce and asset protection. Her office, inside a historic building downtown, smelled of old wood and fresh coffee. Sarah, in her 50s, had a stern face but kind eyes. She listened to my full story without interruption, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, she nodded. Kimberly, I reviewed the deed. The Birmingham house is solely in your name, purchased before the marriage. It's not marital property. Walter has no legal claim to it. I straightened, heart pounding. So I can evict him? Yes, but we'll do it cleanly, legally, no room for maneuvering. You'll need solid evidence of the affair, forged signatures, any financial misconduct. I met her gaze, voice steady. I have the video, texts, screenshots. Sarah smiled faintly. Good. Don't let emotion drive this. Let the truth do its job. I stepped out just as the rain stopped. The air smelled of wet leaves and earth, crisp and cold. I looked up at the gray sky, and something inside me stirred. Not anger, but survival. For the first time in months, I knew I was finally heading the right way. A week later, around midday, my phone buzzed. An email from First National Bank flashed on the screen with the subject line, "Transaction in process, home sale verification." I froze in the middle of the store, a chill shooting down my spine. I had never submitted any request to sell the house. I opened the email. Attached was a draft contract for the sale of the Birmingham house, priced nearly $80,000 below market value. The seller field bore my name in bold, but the signature below, crooked, shaky, nothing like mine, was a forgery. I zoomed in, examining every line. Fraud. The buyer's name, Nina Brooks, a single mother of two, working as an accountant. I immediately called my attorney, Sarah Carter. "Sarah, they're trying to sell my house using a fake signature." Her voice was calm but firm. "Keep that email intact. Don't delete anything. Forward everything to me. I'll contact the bank and title company now." 15 minutes later, Sarah connected a three-way call with the title officer and the bank's fraud investigator. I listened as her voice, steady and authoritative, filled the call. "I represent Kimberly Collins, the legal owner of the Birmingham property. There is clear evidence of identity theft and a forged signature. We are requesting an immediate fraud hold on the file and a full freeze on escrow until proper verification is completed." The bank confirmed the fraud hold had been activated, halting all transactions until I could present ID in person. Sarah instructed me to prepare a notarized affidavit of ownership, a copy of the property deed, and verified signature samples. That same afternoon, I went to her office and signed the affidavit. Sarah submitted everything securely to the bank and title company, along with an official federal identity theft notice, a legal requirement forcing the transaction to pause. 3 hours later, I received confirmation. Fraud hold in effect. Escrow temporarily frozen pending investigation. It was just in time. A few more hours and the house might have been sold under a fake identity. Sarah outlined the next steps. "We'll file an identity theft report and real estate fraud complaint with the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. Once we have a case number, the legal records for the house will be flagged as under investigation. No one can sell or transfer it until this is resolved." I sent her all messages between Walter and Jessica, referencing that signature sample, along with the video from the Madison lofts. Sarah said, "Good, Kimberly. This isn't just proof of betrayal. This is criminal evidence." When I hung up, I looked out at the late afternoon light, reflecting off the glass facade of the bank across the street. Everything mirrored back my face, tired but unbroken. I glanced again at the buyer's name in the email. Nina Brooks, a single mother, 2 kids, just looking for a safe home. They had picked the perfect victim to legitimize their crime. I asked the title company for Nina's contact info. Her voice trembled on the phone. I already paid a deposit. I had no idea. I took a breath. It's okay, Nina. You did nothing wrong. I'll make sure the bank refunds you, and we'll stop them, together. On the other end, I heard a little girl's voice. Mommy? Then, Nina's choked reply. Thank you, truly. I ended the call, leaning against the glass wall. The anger I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. They hadn't just betrayed me. They tried to steal my life, and this time, they would face justice. A few days after the fraud file was submitted to the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, I was called in to provide further evidence. I sat under white fluorescent lights in an interview room, facing Detective Harris, a sharp-eyed, calm-voiced middle-aged woman. I handed her a USB drive containing everything: the Madison Lofts video, the text exchanges between Walter and Jessica, the forged contract, signature comparisons. Harris flipped through the files, nodding. You did very well, Kimberly. We'll proceed with a search of your husband's devices and financial history. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, I got a call from Sarah. Her voice carried a rare note of satisfaction. They found it. On Walter's laptop, police discovered the forged contract and a scanned copy of my ID, stored in a password-protected folder labeled sharedfuture.docs. They also uncovered email logs with a real estate agent, where Walter impersonated me to confirm approval to sell. All of it was documented and sealed under case number 2417-WCFD. But that wasn't all. When police reviewed credit card statements, they found Jessica had used my supplementary card, originally issued for family use, to buy plane tickets to Miami, book luxury hotels, and charge over $5,200 in just 4 days. Her phone's image gallery showed boarding passes, spy receipts, all under Kimberly Collins. The identity theft was undeniable. News spread faster than I expected. 3 days later, the Detroit Free Press ran a headline: Local insurance agent under investigation for fraud and identity theft. Beneath it, a grainy photo of Walter being questioned at his office. An inside source confirmed he'd been suspended indefinitely from Great Lakes Mutual Insurance pending investigation. I read the article in a quiet downtown cafe, sipping bitter espresso. What I felt wasn't joy, but a deep, quiet relief. I didn't need revenge. I needed the law to speak. That afternoon, Jessica posted a final message on Instagram. Sometimes, people only see the mistakes, not the reasons behind them. Within an hour, the post disappeared. Thousands unfollowed her overnight. Aura Collective canceled their endorsement deal. Her profile was flooded with criticism, comments locked. I no longer felt anger. Instead, I felt a strange quiet, like the stillness after a storm, when gray skies begin to clear. Things were beginning to return to their rightful place. Sarah called later that evening, her voice measured. Kimberly, the DA is preparing formal charges. They'll face counts of identity theft and asset fraud. But most importantly, you've taken back control of your life. I looked out the window, where the last light of day reflected off Detroit's glass towers. And in that moment, I knew she was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was simply living, and living on my terms. On Monday morning, the sky over Detroit hung heavy with gray clouds. I had just poured coffee when Detective Harris called. We're executing the arrest warrant, she said plainly. You don't need to come. But I thought you should know. It's ending. Less than an hour later, I received a video from a local journalist showing police storming the Madison Lofts apartment. Loud knocks on the door, followed by shouts, Detroit Police Department! Open the door. Inside, Walter opened the door, pale-faced, barely able to mutter, "There's been a mistake," before he was handcuffed. Jessica, disheveled and wide-eyed, stood behind him. She tried to hide her phone in her robe pocket, but it was confiscated on the spot. Their faces were captured clearly in the footage, confused, desperate. That night, every local news station aired the story. The headline scrolled across the screen: "Couple arrested for identity theft and financial fraud in Birmingham real estate case." Walter was charged with identity theft and financial fraud. Jessica was charged as an accomplice, fully aware of the forgery and participating in its execution. When the footage played, I sat in Lily's living room, silent. I didn't feel triumphant, just quiet. The man I once called my husband now appeared under flashing blue and red lights, wrists bound, eyes hollow. Weeks later, at the Wayne County court hearing, Walter pleaded guilty. His voice trembled as he said, "I'm sorry," but it meant nothing. Both accepted a plea bargain: 5 years probation, $50,000 restitution to me and the bank, and hundreds of hours of community service. I sat in the back row, watching them sign the deal. In that moment, I no longer saw two traitors, just two empty people consumed by their own greed. When the hearing ended, I stepped out into the freezing Detroit air, autumn leaves swirling around my boots. I looked up, breathed deep, the weight in my chest finally lifting. As for Jessica, her social media collapsed within days. Thousands of followers turned on her. Headlines screamed, "Influencer accused of stealing cousin's identity." Jessica Collins, from luxury to legal trouble. Every brand dropped her. PR accounts scrubbed her name. The internet turned colder than I expected. One last post remained on Jessica's Instagram. "I lost everything including myself." I read it, didn't comment, didn't share. I simply turned off my phone and set it face down on the table. Because justice, to me, had already been done. Silently, cleanly, without needing another word. That morning, Detroit was cloaked in fog, fine mist settling on the roads like glass. I arrived at the Birmingham house, once my home for 11 years, with attorney Sarah Carter and 2 officers. Today, it was no longer home. It was the scene of betrayal. I stood before the dark wooden door, gripping my purse tightly, holding myself together. Sarah asked gently, "Are you ready, Kimberly?" I nodded. A cop knocked firmly 3 times. No answer. Seconds later, the lock turned and the door opened. The stench of mildew and cheap alcohol hit us instantly. I stepped inside, my heart clenching. The house, once bright and clean, now looked like a junkyard. Furniture shattered, wedding photos torn apart, the TV screen smashed. On the living room wall, someone had scrawled "Gold Digger" in red lipstick. Each letter slashed into my memories. I stood still, not because it hurt, but because their pettiness astonished me. Everything they destroyed only proved how little they'd understood me, or what truly mattered in a person. Walter and Jessica were escorted downstairs. He looked worn, stubble unshaven, eyes blank. Jessica wore an old coat, her head lowered, her former pride gone. Our eyes met. Time stopped. Walter gave a dry laugh, his voice gravelly. "You win. Happy now?" I looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, just emptiness. "No," I said calmly, "but at least, I'm free." Sarah stood beside me in silence, but I felt her silent support. The officers read the final clause of the eviction order and raised the cuffs. Walter didn't resist. Jessica began to cry, but I didn't turn back. As they were led to the squad car, the red and blue lights flashed across the house's windows. I watched them disappear, the wind scattering papers left on the porch. Mist fell into my hair, cold but peaceful. I walked through the ruined room, looked around one last time. Every crack, every shard of glass, like pieces of the past, collapsing so I could move forward. Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to stay here anymore, Kimberly." I nodded. "I know. I just wanted to say goodbye." I took a photo of the wall, then deleted it. I didn't want to keep a trace of pain. As I stepped out, the door closed behind me, with a soft, final click. Walking to the car, I looked back once more, not out of regret, but to be sure I had left behind the place that once imprisoned my soul. In that moment, I understood. Some victories don't need applause. They only need peace, and that is freedom. And that, weeks after the legal process was complete and they were officially evicted, I returned to the Birmingham house with a renovation crew. A spring breeze swept through, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, so crisp it calmed me. The house was nearly empty, just walls, wooden floors, and a silence that filled every corner. I stood in the living room, where the lipstick graffiti "Gold Digger" had once stained the wall, and said to the worker, "Repaint everything. Cream white. Leave no trace behind." He nodded, pulled the canvas covers down, and began. I watched them strip the broken floorboards, scrub away the old paint, hang new curtains, and wipe the windows until morning light poured in. The house gradually brightened, not just with fresh color, but with the breath of peace returning. When the crew left, I walked a slow lap around the home, lightly running my hand along the new walls, feeling the smooth scent of fresh paint. I thought of all that had happened, the betrayal, the truth, and justice. Instead of rage, I felt something empty forming inside me. Not a void of despair, but a space cleared for something new to begin. A week later, I met Nina Brooks again, the woman who had almost been defrauded. She came with her 2 children, a little boy and girl. When they stepped into the house, I saw the children's eyes light up as they looked at the big windows and the backyard garden. Nina turned to me, her voice choking. "I didn't think you'd still sell the house to me after everything." I smiled. "It's because of everything that I wanted to." I asked for exactly the agreed price. No discounts, no increases. Because I believed Nina and her children needed this house more than I did. To me, this wasn't just a transaction. It was a way to close a chapter, with kindness instead of bitterness. When they signed the papers and took the keys, Nina hugged me tightly. "You didn't just give me a home," she said. "You gave me hope." I returned the smile. "You don't know this, but you and your children just gave that hope back to me." That afternoon, as I drove away from Birmingham, I glanced at the rearview mirror. Sunlight shone on the freshly painted house, windows wide open, the sound of children laughing echoing from inside. A quiet peace settled in me. Everything had been washed clean, not just the walls, but my past. I started the car, turned onto the highway, and felt light, like a heavy stone had been lifted from my chest. Maybe freedom doesn't always come from leaving, but from learning to forgive without needing to forget. I moved into a small apartment in Midtown Detroit, nestled in a historic red brick building overlooking Cass Park. It wasn't large, but it was full of sunlight. In the mornings, when sunlight filtered through the windows, dancing across the cream-colored walls, I felt like I was living somewhere entirely new. Not because the address had changed, but because I had. I kept life simple in those first weeks. Each morning, I unrolled a yoga mat by the window, breathing deep, feeling my heartbeat return to a steady, peaceful rhythm. I practiced cooking, trying recipes I'd never had time for before. The hiss of boiling water, the scent of garlic and onion, the gentle clink of spoons and pans. Those small sounds became the rhythm of a new life. One evening, watching the city through the glass, I opened my laptop and started a project I had long dreamed of, a podcast called Silent No More. It would be a place to share my journey through betrayal, rediscovering self-worth, and learning to draw boundaries unapologetically. I didn't want to tell stories to complain. I wanted to speak so that other women, whether they were 20 or 60, could understand that silence isn't weakness. It's the beginning of awakening. For the first episode, I invited Lily as my guest. She sat across from me, hair tied high, a cup of tea in hand. Her voice was soft but firm. "Kimberly, I remember the night you came to my door, eyes swollen. You didn't say much, just sat quietly. But you know what? It was that silence that made me believe you'd make it. Because your silence was the beginning of justice." I looked at her and smiled. A smile I once thought would never return. In front of me was a microphone. Behind me, a city in transition. I knew my healing wasn't finished. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of how long it might take. Because now, every story I shared, every thank you letter from another woman, every ray of morning light through that window, all reminded me that I had walked through darkness and still chose to speak, to love, and to live. One summer afternoon, as golden sunlight spread across the glass windows of a small jewelry store on Woodward Avenue, I stood before the display case, my fingers brushing over a row of glistening rings. This time, no one stood beside me. No Walter to offer opinions, no compliments, no nods of approval. I chose for myself. I paused before a white gold ring with a single small diamond. Elegant, simple. On the inside band, one word was engraved: resilience. I smiled. That word, to me, meant more than just strength. It was rebirth after ruin, proof that even after betrayal and loss, I could stand tall on my own. I paid for it myself, signed the receipt, feeling lighter as if completing a long overdue rite of passage. That evening, I opened the closet and pulled out Walter's old suitcase, the one he used for business trips, sometimes to hide secrets I never wanted to discover. I looked at it one last time, then carried it to the dumpster behind the apartment building. The sound of the lid slamming shut echoed dryly, but to me, it was the sound of release. I returned inside and placed a new teal suitcase in the corner of the room. The color of the ocean, the color of freedom. I sat on the floor, opened my laptop, and searched for flights to Hawaii. Not to escape, but to begin. I wanted to feel warm sand beneath my feet, hear the ocean's rhythm, breathe in salt air mixed with coconut, and know that I was truly alive. After booking the flight, I took off the new ring and placed it on the table, watching it catch the light from my desk lamp. Tiny glints of light pulsed like the beat of hope. I whispered, "Resilience." No vows, no witnesses, just a silent promise between me and myself. I will never again let anyone define my worth. 1 year later, my life had completely changed. The small apartment in Midtown now bloomed with sunlight, my desk corner filled with lavender and postcards from all over: Seattle, Dallas, New York. Each one came from women who had listened to Silent No More. They shared stories of marriages they had found the courage to leave, boundaries they had finally set, nights they no longer cried alone. I read each letter, feeling my heart slowly mend through their words. One June afternoon, I recorded a special episode, marking exactly 1 year since I left the old house. Microphone in front of me, I looked at the light reflecting off my resilience ring and smiled. My voice came low but firm. If someone slips sleeping pills into your tea, wake up. Because truth never sleeps. I paused, breathed deep, and looked out the window where Detroit's sky melted into twilight. I used to think freedom meant walking away. Now I know, real freedom is choosing peace. No matter where you are, no matter what you've lost, if you have room for light in your heart, you can begin again. When the episode aired, millions listened, mostly middle-aged women, and the excerpt went viral across social media. It became a message, a reminder, for anyone still trapped in silence. If my story reached you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with the number 1 to let me know my journey resonated with yours.
Turns out, catching your husband burning evidence of his secret love child in your kitchen sink creates a special kind of marital bonfire, one that comes with complimentary custody hearings and alimony payments. There I was, standing in my immaculate Lake Forest kitchen with overpriced Starbucks pumpkin cold brew dripping from my frozen fingers, watching my husband of 14 years transform into an Olympic-level paper destroyer. Graham's face morphed from concentration to pure horror when he realized I was 5 hours early from my HR conference in Chicago. Nothing says, "I'm totally not having an affair," like frantically trying to extinguish evidence while screaming, "You can't see this." For a financial consultant who advises millionaires on their investment strategies, Graham was displaying the subtlety and composure of a toddler caught finger-painting the living room walls. His Brooks Brothers tie was askew, his carefully styled salt-and-pepper hair stood on end, and he had that wild-eyed look I'd previously only seen when our homeowners association threatened to fine us for having the wrong shade of beige on our mailbox. "Ophelia, you're home early," he sputtered, frantically trying to drown the smoldering paper remnants while simultaneously shoving others into his pockets. In his panic, he knocked several sheets onto our Italian marble floor, one of which performed a perfect figure skating routine right under our kitchen island. With the casual grace of someone who's spent years pretending not to notice her husband texting under the dinner table, I bent down to retrieve my fallen lipstick and snagged the paper. The universe has a twisted sense of humor sometimes. Or maybe it was karma finally picking up my calls after I'd ghosted her for years of blissful suburban denial. There it was, printed on official Lakeside Women's Clinic letterhead, a positive pregnancy test for Paige Montgomery, 28, with a paternity test confirmation naming Graham Mercer as the father. The test was dated exactly during the period my husband was supposedly working 80-hour weeks on that Boston project. Funny how Boston apparently required so much overtime that he couldn't even FaceTime with Nash and me most nights. "Give me that!" Graham lunged across our massive kitchen island, knocking over the decorative bowl of perfectly arranged lemons I'd set out that morning. Such a waste. I'd spent 15 minutes positioning those lemons just right for my Instagram post about morning gratitude rituals. "Is this why Paige suddenly got promoted last spring?" I asked, scanning the document. "Because nothing says qualified for a raise quite like carrying your boss's baby while his wife plans your office baby shower?" Graham's face cycled through emotions faster than our son Nash clicks through Netflix options. "It's not what you think," he stammered, reaching for the paper again. Classic line. Next, he'd tell me she meant nothing to him, like that somehow made impregnating his 20-something assistant better. "Let me guess. She tripped and fell on your DNA?" I clutched the paper tighter while doing quick mental math. The document was dated from February, exactly 9 months ago. The due date was circled for next week. "This was a mistake," Graham pleaded, his face contorted into what I assume he thought was sincerity, but looked more like constipation. "A one-time thing during the Boston project." "Interesting how a one-time thing managed to create an entire human being," I replied, noticing the doctor's notes about co-parenting plans scrawled in the margins, and apparently requiring multiple meetings with her OB/GYN, where you've been discussing custody arrangements. Graham ran his hands through his hair, creating a look that screamed midlife crisis, more than his recent purchase of a Tesla had. "I was going to tell you, after I figured things out." "By figuring things out, you mean incinerating the evidence in our sink?" Bold strategy. Is this what they're teaching at those financial leadership retreats now? Arson 101 for adulterers? The timer on our smart oven chimed, reminding me of the irony unfolding. I'd set it that morning to remind myself when Weston would arrive for our weekly Wednesday wine night, a standing appointment that Graham consistently forgot about. Now I understood why. Nothing kills the mood of an affair like your wife's divorce attorney best friend dropping by for Cabernet and charcuterie. "Graham, your timing is impeccable, as always," I said, glancing at the clock. "You have exactly 28 minutes to explain why I shouldn't call your boss Douglas right now and tell him his star financial advisor is burning client information in our kitchen. I'm sure Callahan Financial would love to hear about your document disposal methods." Graham blanched. "You wouldn't. 30 minutes ago I wouldn't have. But 30 minutes ago, I thought I was married to a workaholic with a slight addiction to fantasy football, not the star of How to Get Away with Impregnating Your Assistant." What Graham didn't know was that the universe had already been rearranging pieces on my behalf. Earlier that day, I'd received and accepted an executive HR position in Seattle. a dream job I'd been secretly interviewing for over the past month. The offer letter was sitting in my purse, next to the bottle of Dom Perignon I'd bought to celebrate what I thought would be a difficult conversation about relocation. Now it looked like that champagne would be christening my independence instead. "Did you even think about what this would do to Nash?" I asked, my voice quieter. Our son was the only reason I was keeping my voice down instead of reaching full suburban banshee mode. "How exactly were you planning to explain to our 12-year-old that he has a newborn half-sibling?" Graham had the audacity to look offended. "I love Nash more than anything. Except, apparently, condoms," I retorted, earning a wince. My phone buzzed with a text from Weston. "Got that Barolo you wanted, ETA 20 mins. Should I grab dessert too?" A plan began crystallizing in my mind with the clarity of the diamond on my finger. The one Graham had upgraded for our 10th anniversary with what I now suspected was guilt-motivated generosity. "You know what's interesting about this situation?" I asked, sliding the incriminating paper into my Kate Spade portfolio. "For someone who specializes in risk management, you've created the perfect storm. Your pregnant assistant is due next week. Your best client's retirement portfolio review is tomorrow, and your wife just accepted a job 3,000 miles away." Graham's face went from ghostly pale to sickly green. "What job? What are you talking about?" I smiled, feeling the strange liberation that comes with holding all the cards for once. "The executive HR director position at Rainier Tech in Seattle. I start November 1st, which gives me just enough time to file for divorce, sell this monument to your midlife crisis." I gestured around our recently renovated kitchen that Graham had insisted needed Viking appliances, "and get Nash enrolled in a school where he won't have to hear whispers about his father's special kind of family planning." The doorbell rang, announcing Weston's early arrival. Graham's eyes darted between me, the doorbell, and the still smoldering sink full of evidence. "Perfect timing," I said, straightening my blazer. "Weston's a bit early for wine night. You remember my best friend, right? The divorce attorney who specializes in cases involving infidelity and hidden assets? I think you two might have a lot to talk about." Graham's face performed an impressive color-changing spectacle, from ghost white to fire engine red in under 3 seconds. For a moment, I wondered if I should call 911 instead of letting Weston in. But watching my husband have a medical emergency might delay my perfectly orchestrated emotional demolition, and I'd already envisioned how this scene would play out. "You invited Weston over tonight? Tonight of all nights?" Graham hissed, frantically trying to dispose of the remaining evidence, including what appeared to be a sonogram tucked into his wallet. "So much for the business receipts," he claimed to keep in there. "It's Wednesday, Graham. We've had wine night every Wednesday for the past 4 years. The fact that you conveniently forgot about it 53 Wednesdays in a row isn't my scheduling problem." I smoothed my blazer and headed toward the door. "Besides, tonight's theme is assets and where to hide them. Seems especially relevant." I swung open our custom mahogany door to find Weston on our doorstep, holding an expensive bottle of Barolo in one hand and a bakery box in the other. Weston Flynn, with his perpetually perfect hair and custom suits, looked like he'd stepped out of a Divorce Attorneys of New England calendar, assuming such a thing existed, which it absolutely should. "Ophelia, you would not believe the day I've had," Weston started before noticing my expression. "And by the look on your face, you're about to make my professional day a lot more interesting." Graham appeared behind me, still adjusting his disheveled clothing and wearing the desperate smile of a man trying to convince the IRS that his golf trip to Pebble Beach was definitely a business expense. "Weston, great to see you, buddy," Graham attempted with false enthusiasm. But actually, Ophelia and I were just in the middle of a private discussion. "About your daughter who's arriving next week, or about my new job in Seattle?" I asked sweetly. Because Weston should probably hear about both, considering he'll be handling our divorce proceedings. The word divorce hung in our foyer like an unwelcome guest. Graham's smile faltered as Weston's eyebrows shot up with professional interest. "I'm sorry, did you say daughter?" Weston asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. 14 years of friendship had earned him permanent entry privileges. "Yes, apparently Graham's been diversifying his assets without consulting his primary stakeholder," I replied, leading them both back to the kitchen crime scene, where remnants of burned paper still floated in our sink. He's been making some high-risk investments with his 28-year-old assistant. "Ophelia, please," Graham pleaded, looking between us like a tennis spectator at a particularly brutal match. "We can discuss this privately." "Privacy went out the window when your DNA decided to replicate with your assistant," I retorted, taking the wine from Weston and expertly opening it with the overpriced automatic opener Graham had insisted we needed last Christmas. Apparently, Graham's late nights at the office were spent creating more than quarterly reports. Weston assessed the situation with the calm demeanor of someone who witnesses marital implosions professionally. "I see. And the evidence disposal in your sink?" "Just Graham's attempt at rewriting history," I said, pouring 3 glasses of wine even though I suspected Graham wouldn't be staying long enough to drink his. Unfortunately for him, paper leaves ashes, just like his promises. Graham's phone chimed with a text. The color drained from his face as he read it. "Let me guess," I said, sliding a glass of wine toward Weston. "Is that Paige? Having contractions, perhaps? Or just checking in on how your document bonfire is going?" Graham swallowed hard. "She's been admitted to Lakeside Hospital. The baby's coming early." The timing was almost too perfect. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because sometimes the universe delivers justice with such precise comedic timing that you have to appreciate it. "Well, don't let us keep you from your new family," I said, raising my wine glass in a mock toast. "I'm sure Paige needs her baby daddy more than your current family needs you right now." "This isn't fair," Graham protested, his voice rising. "You're making me out to be some villain." "No, you managed that all by yourself," Weston interjected calmly, taking a professional sip of his wine. "And as Ophelia's friend who happens to be a divorce attorney, I'd strongly advise you not to say anything else without your own counsel present." Graham's face contorted with frustration. "You're already taking legal sides? I'm still in the room. And yet, emotionally, you checked out somewhere between impregnating your assistant and burning the evidence in our sink," I observed, leaning against our quartz countertop. "Really, though, you should go. Paige needs you, and I need to start planning which furniture I'm taking to Seattle." Graham looked trapped between his imploding present and his complicated future. "You can't just decide to move Nash to Seattle without discussing it with me." "Interesting how you suddenly want to discuss major life decisions together," I replied, feeling a spark of genuine anger break through my carefully cultivated sarcasm. "Was that your approach when deciding to father a child with Paige? Did you consult me then?" His phone chimed again, more urgently this time. "You should go," I said, softening slightly. Despite everything, I wasn't a monster. No child should come into this world without their father present, even if that father is currently auditioning for world's most cliché midlife crisis. Graham hesitated, looking genuinely torn for the first time since I'd caught him. "Ophelia, we need to talk about this. About Nash. About everything." "We absolutely do," I agreed. "But right now there's a woman in labor who needs you, and I need you not in my kitchen. We'll have plenty of time to discuss the division of our lives after you've welcomed your surprise sequel into the world." Graham grabbed his keys and wallet, pausing at the kitchen doorway. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "Obviously," I replied dryly. "Your preferred method involved arson." After Graham left, Weston and I sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. "So, Seattle?" he asked, expertly pivoting to the less dramatic crisis. I pulled the offer letter from my purse and slid it across the counter. Executive HR Director at Rainier Tech, 40% salary increase, comprehensive relocation package, and, most importantly, 3,000 miles between me and whatever weird Brady Bunch situation Graham's creating. Weston whistled as he scanned the offer. "This is impressive, Fee. When were you going to tell him?" "Tonight, actually," I said with a hollow laugh. "I had a whole speech prepared about new beginnings and family adventures. Even bought champagne." I gestured to the Dom Perignon still in my bag. "Now it'll be christening my new single life instead." "Does Nash know about any of this? Seattle or—" Weston gestured vaguely to the sink where Graham's parental evidence had recently been cremated. "No," I sighed, feeling my sarcastic shield crack slightly. "He's at swim practice until 7. Graham's mother, Sylvie, is picking him up. My phone rang, displaying Satan's mother on the screen, my subtle contact name for my mother-in-law. Speaking of, I showed Weston the screen before answering. Hi, Sylvie. Ophelia, dear, came the sugary voice that had criticized everything from my parenting to my choice of Thanksgiving table settings for 14 years. I just got the strangest call from Graham. Something about going to the hospital for his assistant. He asked me to keep Nash overnight and said you'd explain everything. Of course he did. Classic Graham, delegating the emotional fallout to others while he rushed off to his next family function. Well, Sylvie, I said, meeting Weston's eyes with a raised eyebrow. How much do you know about your son's extracurricular activities at work? I'm not sure what you mean, she replied, confusion evident. Let's just say Nash isn't going to be your only grandchild by this time tomorrow, I replied. Graham's assistant Paige is in labor with his child. So yes, keeping Nash overnight would be helpful while I figure out how to explain to our son that his father has been auditioning for a reality show called Secret Second Families of Lake Forest. The silence on the other end was so complete, I checked to see if the call had dropped. See? Sylvie finally said, her voice uncharacteristically small. Should I bring Nash home in the morning? Or, actually, could you bring him to my office tomorrow? I think that conversation should happen on neutral territory, preferably somewhere without memories of his father setting fire to our sink. After hanging up, I looked at Weston, who was already pulling out a legal pad from his briefcase. So, he said, with the efficiency of someone who'd seen this scenario hundreds of times, let's talk strategy. Because Graham just handed you the nuclear codes to this divorce, and I'm thinking we should start by changing the locks. By Thursday morning, I had accomplished more before 9 a.m. than most people do in a week of productivity seminars. I'd changed the locks, thanks to Weston's emergency divorce locksmith, who apparently made a living helping scorned spouses secure their fortresses, transferred half our joint savings into my personal account, perfectly legal pre-filing, as Weston reminded me, and practiced my "your father made a catastrophically stupid decision" speech approximately 17 times in the mirror. The Lake Forest Starbucks was crowded with the usual Thursday morning crowd, soccer moms in Lululemon discussing their latest Botox appointments, remote workers pretending their lattes justified hogging tables for 4 hours, and the occasional executive looking important between meetings. I'd chosen this location for its strategic advantages. Public enough that Sylvie wouldn't create a scene when dropping Nash off, but private enough for booths in the back where I could destroy my son's image of his father in relative seclusion. My phone vibrated with a text from Cora Barrett, my coworker and confidant at Preston Global HR. Cora, did you tell Graham about Seattle yet? How'd he take it? I stared at my phone, wondering how to encapsulate the nuclear explosion of my marriage in a text message. Me. He took it surprisingly well, considering he was busy burning evidence of his love child who's currently being born at Lakeside Hospital. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, reappeared, and finally, Cora. What the actual fork? Calling you now. I declined the call with a follow-up text explaining I was about to tell Nash and would call her later. As supportive as Cora was, her particular brand of righteous outrage would require more emotional energy than I could spare right now. Through the window, I spotted Sylvie's silver Mercedes pulling into a parking space. Even from a distance, I could see her perfect blonde highlights and permanently dissatisfied expression. Nash hopped out, his lanky preteen frame already showing hints of the height he'd inherit from Graham. The thought sent an unexpected pang through me. How many more reminders of his father would I see as Nash grew? My phone buzzed again. Graham. It's a girl. 7 Libes 2OZ, everyone's healthy. No name, no apology. Just a birth announcement like we were distant relatives who required formal notification. I typed and deleted several responses ranging from, "Congratulations on your spectacular achievement in ruining multiple lives simultaneously," to, "Does she have your inability to use birth control or your talent for document arson?" Instead, I simply replied, "Nash and I will be at Starbucks until 10. After that, we're going home to pack. Your key doesn't work anymore." The bell above the door chimed as Sylvie and Nash entered. My son spotted me and waved, his face lighting up with that innocent smile that hadn't yet been tainted by the knowledge of his father's betrayal. Sylvie's expression, however, had transformed from her usual controlled disapproval to something more complex, a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and what appeared to be genuine concern. "Mom, Grandma let me have Cocoa Puffs for breakfast," Nash announced triumphantly as he slid into the booth opposite me. "Did she now?" I replied, raising an eyebrow at Sylvie, who had always lectured me about proper nutrition and sugar content whenever I allowed Nash anything remotely processed. Sylvie had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Exceptional circumstances call for exceptional measures," she said primly, standing awkwardly beside our table rather than sitting. "Nash, darling, I need to speak with your mother privately for a moment. Why don't you go order whatever ridiculous sugar-laden concoction teenagers are drinking these days?" I handed Nash $20, and he bolted toward the counter with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just been granted unlimited access to the forbidden menu items. "It's true then?" Sylvie asked the moment Nash was out of earshot. "Graham really has a—" She couldn't bring herself to say the word baby or child, as though speaking it aloud might make the scandal more real. "Yes, his assistant Paige delivered a baby girl about 3 hours ago. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of irrefutable evidence that your son should have paid more attention in sex education." Sylvie flinched but didn't take the bait. Instead, she lowered herself into the seat Nash had vacated, her Chanel suit immaculate despite having hosted a preteen sleepover. "What are you planning to do?" The question surprised me. I'd expected defense of Graham, or perhaps a subtle suggestion that I'd somehow driven him to seek comfort in younger, more fertile arms. "I'm taking the job in Seattle," I replied firmly. "Nash and I leave November 1st. I've already spoken with the school there, and they're expediting his admission." Sylvie nodded slowly, her perfectly manicured hands fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years whenever she was genuinely distressed rather than just being judgmental. "And the divorce?" "Weston is preparing the paperwork as we speak. Graham can expect to be served by Monday." Another nod. More ring twisting. Then, unexpectedly, "Good." I nearly choked on my latte. "I'm sorry. Did you just approve of me divorcing your precious son?" Sylvie's eyes, the same piercing blue as Graham's, met mine directly. "Ophelia, I've spent 40 years married to a man who did exactly what Graham has done. The only difference is that social media didn't exist when Harrison fathered his second family in Columbus." The revelation hit me like a bucket of ice water. Graham's father had another family? A daughter, 3 years younger than Graham. I found out when she tried to contact him during his college years. Sylvie's perfect composure cracked slightly. "I stayed because that's what women of my generation did. We pretended everything was fine and drank too much Chardonnay at tennis club luncheons." She reached into her Prada handbag and withdrew a folded document. "This is Graham's trust fund paperwork. Harrison established it when Graham was born, with me as the trustee until Graham turned 40. I stared at her, confused. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you should know that unless Graham provides financially for Nash's education through college, the trust dissolves and reverts to charity." Sylvie's smile was thin, but determined. Harrison may have been a cheater, but he was adamant that his son would never abandon his responsibilities. I took the document, scanning the legal language that clearly stipulated what Sylvie described. Graham's 40th birthday was next April. He stood to inherit nearly $2 million, but only if he maintained financial support for any children from his first marriage. "Does Graham know about this clause?" "No," Sylvie replied, standing up as Nash approached with a whipped cream monstrosity that probably contained more sugar than he should consume in a week. "Harrison thought it would defeat the purpose if Graham was only supporting his children to get the money. I've kept this particular detail between myself and the family attorney." As she prepared to leave, she leaned down and whispered, "Don't tell him I showed you this, but use it, every last penny, to ensure Nash never feels second best to Graham's new situation. Seattle sounds lovely this time of year." With that bombshell dropped, Sylvie kissed Nash goodbye, reminding him to brush his teeth extra well after that abomination of a beverage, and swept out of Starbucks like a perfectly coiffed hurricane. Nash slurped his drink happily for a moment before noticing my expression. "Mom, is everything okay? Where's Dad? Grandma was acting super weird last night." I took a deep breath, mentally revising my carefully rehearsed speech now that I held a $2 million bargaining chip in my hands. "Nash, honey, I have some news. Actually, a few pieces of news, and they're going to change things for us, but I promise we're going to be okay." As I began explaining about Seattle, saving the half-sister revelation for after we'd established the exciting aspects of our move, my phone lit up with a call from Weston. "Sorry, sweetie, I need to take this quickly," I told Nash, who nodded and returned to his sugary concoction. "Tell me you haven't filed yet," I said without preamble when I answered. "Good morning to you too," Weston replied dryly. "And no, not until Monday as planned." "Why?" "Because I just discovered Graham's about to inherit $2 million when he turns 40, but only if he financially supports Nash through college." Weston's low whistle was audible even in the noisy coffee shop. Well, isn't that a fascinating development? And you know what the best part is? What? Washington State is a community property state, but Illinois isn't. If you establish residency in Seattle before filing, I smiled for the first time in 24 hours. "I think I'm going to need you to come over tonight to discuss strategy. Bring more wine. And possibly a calculator." As I hung up, I looked at Nash. So innocent, so unaware that his world was about to shift dramatically. But as I watched him happily decimating his whipped cream tower, I realized something important. Kids are resilient. And with $2 million of his father's trust fund backing his future, Nash would be more than fine. I had been preparing to play defense. Now, I was ready to orchestrate the most financially devastating offensive in Lake Forest divorce history. Telling your 12-year-old that his father had created a bonus family member is about as fun as explaining tax audits to kindergartners. But Nash surprised me with his resilience. After the initial shock, his primary concern was whether we'd still have good Wi-Fi in Seattle. Kids and their priorities. "So Dad has another kid now. Like today?" Nash had asked, processing the information with remarkable calm as we sat in our kitchen Thursday evening. "Yes. You have a half-sister as of early this morning," I confirmed, watching his expression carefully. Nash considered this while munching on pizza, my go-to crisis food. "Does this mean I have to share my PS5 when she visits?" "She won't be using your PlayStation for at least 5 years, honey," I assured him, relieved his concerns were practical rather than emotional. "And by then, they'll probably have PS7 or whatever." "Cool," he nodded, reaching for another slice. "So we're moving to Seattle because Dad messed up?" "We're moving to Seattle because I got an amazing job opportunity," I clarified, sticking to the positive aspects. "The timing just happens to work out well with Dad's current situation." "Is it because of the trust fund thing?" I heard Grandma mention it. I nearly choked on my water. "What exactly did you hear?" "Something about Dad getting money when he turns 40 if he pays for my college," Nash said with a shrug. "Grandma was on the phone with someone when she thought I was playing video games." "I'm not stupid, Mom." I suppressed a smile. "My son was smarter than we gave him credit for. That's part of it. Your dad has some decisions to make about how he wants to handle his new responsibilities while still taking care of us." By Sunday evening, 3 days after the birth of little Mia Montgomery Mercer, yes, hyphenated, apparently Paige had negotiated that detail during their secret co-parenting planning sessions, our house looked like a logistics company had exploded inside it. Moving boxes lined the hallways, and I'd sorted our possessions into categories that would have made Marie Kondo proud. Take to Seattle, sell immediately, and leave for Graham as reminders of his colossal failure. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m. Graham, right on schedule for the visitation time I'd generously granted him to see Nash before our departure. I'd strategically planned this meeting after consulting with Weston and reviewing the trust fund paperwork Sylvie had provided. Everything was perfectly orchestrated for maximum impact with minimal drama. I opened the door to find Graham looking like he'd aged 10 years in 4 days. Unshaven, bags under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled Brooks Brothers shirt, the universal uniform of a man experiencing the consequences of his actions. "You changed the locks," he stated flatly, as if this was the greatest injustice in our current situation. And you changed our family structure. We're both full of surprises lately. I stepped aside to let him in. Nash is in the living room. You have 1 hour. Graham stood awkwardly in the foyer, surveying the packed boxes. You're really doing this? Just taking off to Seattle? The movers arrive Tuesday. We fly out Thursday. I gestured toward the living room. Nash is waiting. Their reunion was stilted but civil. Nash, bless his adaptable preteen heart, acted like his father hadn't just detonated our family structure. They discussed school, swimming, and the Seattle Seahawks while I pretended to organize kitchen items nearby. Close enough to intervene if necessary, but giving them space. After 45 minutes, I made my move. Nash, can you go upstairs and make sure your gaming setup is properly packed? I need to discuss some paperwork with your father. Once Nash had disappeared upstairs, I retrieved a manila folder from my home office and joined Graham at the dining table we'd bought together during happier times. So I had an interesting conversation with your mother, I began casually, watching Graham's expression shift from exhaustion to wariness. Sylvie needs to mind her own business, he muttered. Funny thing about family secrets, they tend to become everyone's business eventually, I replied, sliding the trust fund documents across the table. Especially when they involved $2 million. Graham stared at the paperwork, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and finally understanding as he scanned the highlighted sections. Is this my father's trust? Where did you get this? From the person who's been managing it for the past 25 years. Your mother seemed to think I should be aware of certain provisions. I tapped the key paragraph. Particularly this one about financial support requirements for children from your first marriage. Graham's face darkened. She had no right, much like you had no right to start a second family while still legally committed to your first one, I interrupted smoothly. But here we are, navigating the consequences of everyone's choices. I pushed a second document toward him, the settlement agreement Weston had drafted. This outlines the terms I'm proposing. Nash's college fund fully funded up front. Half of your investment portfolio transferred to my accounts. The house sold and proceeds split 50-50. This is highway robbery, Graham protested, flipping through the pages. You're taking almost everything. Actually, I'm taking considerably less than Washington state community property laws would entitle me to if I established residency before filing, I replied, savoring his look of confusion. This is the bargain option, Graham. The fire sale, if you will. Though you're already familiar with setting things on fire. Graham's jaw clenched. And if I refuse? Then we do this the hard way. I file in Washington after establishing residency. Your trust fund details somehow find their way into the proceedings. Your new family and your company get dragged through a messy public court battle. I leaned forward. Or you can sign these papers, fulfill your obligations to Nash as specified. And I'll ensure this stays as private as possible. You're blackmailing me, he said incredulously. I prefer to call it strategic negotiation, much like you preferred to call your affair with Paige working late at the office. I slid a pen toward him. Semantics are funny that way. As Graham stared at the documents, I delivered my final blow. Oh, and Douglas Palmer called yesterday. Graham's head snapped up. My boss? Apparently, he was quite concerned when you missed the Anderson retirement portfolio review on Thursday. I may have mentioned you were at the hospital for the birth of your child. You didn't. I did, though I neglected to specify which child or family member was involved. I smiled sweetly. He seemed to think you were with me and Nash during some medical emergency. I simply didn't correct his assumption. The beauty of the situation was that Graham couldn't even be angry about it. I'd technically told the truth while letting his boss draw his own conclusions. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Graham asked bitterly. Not everything. I didn't anticipate needing divorce strategies when I was planning our 15th anniversary trip to Hawaii, I replied, the hurt briefly surfacing through my calculated composure. But adaptability has always been my strong suit. Graham looked defeated as he reluctantly picked up the pen. Nash will be okay with this move? With everything? Nash is resilient. He's excited about Seattle, the tech scene, the Space Needle, being closer to his favorite gaming company headquarters. I softened slightly. He'll still see you during breaks and summers. He just won't witness the day-to-day chaos while you figure out how to parent a newborn in your 40s. And you? Will you be okay? The question seemed genuine, a flicker of the Graham I'd married breaking through. I'll be running the HR department for a Fortune 500 tech company, living in a city with actual culture beyond HOA meetings, and free from finding infant-related surprises in my kitchen sink. I shrugged. I'll manage. Graham signed each page with the resigned efficiency of someone ripping off a bandage. When he finished, he looked up at me with a mixture of regret and resignation. I'm sorry, Ophelia. Not for the consequences. I deserve those. But for hurting you and Nash. That was never my intention. The road to hell is paved with corner offices and 20-something assistants, I replied, gathering the signed documents. For what it's worth, I hope Mia grows up knowing her half-brother. Nash deserves a relationship with his sister, regardless of how she came into the world. As Graham prepared to leave, Nash came downstairs to say goodbye. Their hug was awkward but genuine, a testament to the bond that would survive despite the circumstances. After Graham left, Nash looked at me with surprising wisdom in his young eyes. He signed everything, didn't he? I nodded. How did you know? Nash shrugged with the casual insight of someone who had observed more than we'd realized. Grandma Sylvie told me to trust you. She said you'd make sure everything worked out right. In that moment, I felt an unexpected wave of gratitude toward my formerly frosty mother-in-law. Apparently, the Mercer women had formed our own alliance, one that would ensure Nash's future was secure, regardless of Graham's new domestic adventures. 6 months is apparently all it takes to transform from suburban corporate wife whose biggest crisis was a PTA fundraiser dispute to independent Seattle executive who makes major decisions without consulting a man who can't even consult a condom wrapper. The universe works in mysterious ways, often delivering life lessons through catastrophically painful situations, like finding your husband incinerating evidence of his reproductive misadventures in your kitchen sink. April in Seattle brought cherry blossoms, persistent drizzle, and a notification from my attorney that Graham's trust fund had officially been disbursed, with the college account for Nash fully funded as stipulated in our agreement. Outside my downtown condo's floor-to-ceiling windows, the Space Needle stood against the misty skyline, a monument to fresh starts and upward mobility, both literal and metaphorical. "Mom, Dad's calling," Nash shouted from his room, where he'd been setting up for his weekly virtual chess match with Graham. These digital father-son bonding sessions had become their new normal, an arrangement that actually seemed to work better than their previous in-person relationship. Nothing like 2,000 miles of separation to improve family dynamics. "Tell him I'm busy running a department and rebuilding my life," I called back, only half joking. Despite everything, I'd kept my promise to facilitate Nash's relationship with his father. Children shouldn't pay the price for adult stupidity, even when that stupidity resulted in surprise siblings. My phone buzzed with a text from Sylvie, who had somehow transformed from judgmental mother-in-law to surprisingly supportive ally in record time. "Congratulations on your 6-month Seattle anniversary. Harrison would have been impressed with how you handled everything. Nash looks happy in the photos you sent." I smiled, appreciating her unexpected support throughout this transition. Who would have thought my ex-mother-in-law would become one of my biggest advocates? Turns out, women who've been disappointed by the same man often form the strongest bonds. My response was simple. "Thank you for everything, especially the trust fund paperwork. Nash sends his love." Nash emerged from his room looking thoughtful. "Dad wants to know if it's okay to bring Mia to Lake Forest when I visit this summer. He says he wants me to know my sister." I considered this carefully. Despite my justified anger toward Graham, I'd made a conscious decision not to poison Nash against his half-sister. "How do you feel about that?" Nash shrugged with the beautiful simplicity of preteen logic. "She's just a baby. Not like she chose Dad to be her dad. Plus, Grandma Sylvie says she looks like me when I was a baby, so that's kinda cool." "Then it's fine with me," I replied, impressed once again by his maturity. "Just make sure your dad knows you're coming to Seattle for the gaming convention in July. That's non-negotiable." "Already told him. He said he'd change Mia's doctor appointment." Nash grinned. "I think he's scared of you now." "Good. Fear is the appropriate response to someone whose kitchen you set on fire while destroying evidence of your infidelity. I ruffled his hair. Healthy fear builds character. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, scrolling through photos from my first 6 months in Seattle. Nash at the top of the Space Needle. My new office with its view of Puget Sound. The team dinner after we landed the Westridge account. Each image represented a piece of the new life I'd built from the ashes of Graham's domestic arson. My phone rang. Cora calling from Chicago. "How's life in rain country?" she asked when I answered. "Significantly drier than my marriage ended up being," I replied, taking a sip of my Cabernet. "How's Preston Global HR without my stabilizing influence?" "Chaotic. Your replacement is a disaster who thinks work-life balance means checking emails during his kid's birthday party instead of during the actual birthday song." Cora paused. "You heard about Graham?" My stomach tightened slightly. "What about him?" "He and Paige broke up. Apparently she's moved to Columbus with the baby. Graham's been moping around the office looking like someone stole his favorite calculator." I absorbed this information with surprising neutrality. Columbus. Interesting choice. Why's that interesting? Just family history repeating itself. I didn't elaborate further, thinking of Harrison Mercer's second family in the same city. How's Graham handling single fatherhood during his custody time? From what I hear, Sylvie's doing most of the heavy lifting when Mia visits, Cora replied. Speaking of which, Douglas finally figured out that Graham's medical emergency in October wasn't exactly a family crisis, at least not with his first family. The promotion Graham was angling for went to Thatcher instead. Karma really is having a field day with him, isn't she? I mused, feeling vindicated, but not particularly joyful about Graham's struggles. Success was my best revenge, not his failure. Enough about Lake Forest drama. Tell me about this mysterious Seattle man you mentioned last time, Cora prompted. I smiled, thinking of Elliot, the architect I'd met at a client dinner in February. Intelligent, kind, and blissfully uninterested in producing surprise offspring with his coworkers. We're taking things slowly, very slowly, like glacial slowly. Smart woman, Cora approved. No need to rush back into domestic bliss. After hanging up, I sent Nash a text reminding him about his orthodontist appointment tomorrow, then opened my laptop to review quarterly projections for my department. The promotion I'd received last month had come with greater responsibilities and a corner office, tangible evidence that my professional value hadn't diminished just because my marriage had combusted. Life after marital implosion had proven surprisingly liberating. Without Graham's passive-aggressive commentary about my career ambitions, I'd flourished professionally. Without the constant balancing act of managing his social calendar and ego, I had energy to actually pursue my own interests. It turned out that losing a husband who burns evidence in kitchen sinks wasn't a loss at all. It was a cosmic correction, redirecting me to the path I should have been on all along. They say that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Graham had shown me exactly who he was, a man willing to set fire to papers rather than face consequences. In return, I'd shown him exactly who I was, a woman capable of rising from those very ashes, taking her son and the family trust fund to build something better on the other side of the country. As I watched the Seattle sunset paint the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold, I realized the most satisfying plot twist in this whole ordeal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living authentically, freed from the constraints of other people's poor decisions. That, and making sure your ex-husband's trust fund pays for your son's entire Ivy League education. Because nothing says, "I've moved on" quite like financial security and transcontinental distance.